provisions in the acts about the authority for the minister to issue a directive based on an official examination, and those are defined to be a report of the Ombudsman, an audit, also an investigation ordered by the minister. So we tied the expanded authority to we expanded the Minister's authority to cover the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner, and amendments investigations under the Sask Employment Act. And the sector was satisfied with that softening of Minister's authority to issue directives, to order something that was withheld to be granted, like a license or an approval or a permit.
I see. No, thanks for that information. Just on the point around Saskatoon and Regina and the concerns you've stated they've registered with respect to some of the measures around the, I guess, authority or abilities to remove, I think, a council member or abilities to act on that front. Could you describe the changes that are being brought and what the concern is that Saskatoon and Regina, has identified?
Sure. The amendments, currently there's no ability for the council to remove a member who becomes disqualified or is disqualified but does not resign. The acts place the onus on a member of council to resign immediately, and then the provisions provide for a voter or the council to apply to a court to have the individual removed. In the Northern Act, however, since that act was developed in 2010, there's always been a provision for the council to remove a member who's disqualified and refuses to resign. And then the onus is on the member to apply to the court to make a determination of whether he or she is actually disqualified and whether he or she should remain on council. When we amended the acts way back in 2015 regarding conflict of interest, we had initially proposed to make those provisions consistent among the three acts. There wasn't consensus among SUMA or SARM regarding amending the Municipalities Act or the Cities Act. Since that time, both those associations supported having those provisions put into the Act to provide the council that ability, and passed resolutions to that effect. So we followed the direction of their resolutions. We put those provisions in and made them consistent among the three acts. And again, the onus is on the council member to actually to resign, but if they don't, then the council may declare the seat vacant and proceed. And there have been a few situations where that has come up. Regina and Saskatoon were never really in favor of those provisions, thinking it might cause council dysfunction. Again, they're optional. A council does not have to use them. They can develop policies around the circumstances in which they would. But we still followed the direction of the other two associations and made those provisions consistent.
Thanks for the thorough responses capturing, sort of the context of what's being changed and where concerns are, have been identified as well. With respect to the measures, I guess one of the main thrusts of this bill is to protect employees against reprisal, protecting municipal employees who report wrongdoing. Can you speak specifically to, one question would be, I want to hear a little bit about making sure that, that the measures that are brought forward are going to be as effective as they can be on this front. But specifically, can you speak to the kinds of actual incidents that you're aware of as minister without, obviously you've got obligations to confidentiality as well, but what sort of circumstances, what sort of incidents, are you protecting people from?
So I guess I would just start on that one. And so with these proposed amendments, it would add explicit protection of reprisal for municipal employees who report wrongdoing to a person or authority that has the power to investigate the wrongdoing and include any internal reporting, disclosure, and investigation process a municipality may establish. So if you're reporting directly to someone and you're complaining about that person, then it could be pretty hard. A specific example, I don't have one for you, but those are the types of things that we're trying to prevent by this amendment, and I'm just going to let Rod expand on that.
Sure. When, again, back in 2015, when the conflict of interest amendments were significantly strengthened, and the mandate of the provincial ombudsman was expanded to deal with municipal matters and municipal conflict of interest matters. After those amendments were in place, we had heard concerns from the sector, from administrators in particular, that they didn't think there was enough protection in the Ombudsman Act to allow them to report a wrongdoing. Certainly they could try to report it confidentially, but there was nothing regarding protection from reprisal. The ministry did a lot of work over the next couple of years, particularly to look at the Sask Employment Act, which does cover municipalities as employers, and so it covers employees as well. Again, we didn't have specific circumstances or situations, but we were made aware from the administrator associations in particular that they still had concerns that they weren't sufficiently protected. And there was anecdotal information of harassment or reduced hours or those kinds of things. And the concern with the Employment Act, Sask Employment Act, was that it covered the municipality as the employer. It may not cover an individual councillor. So basically, as the minister mentioned, that's what these amendments do, is make it clear that a member of council may not reprise against an employee for reporting a wrongdoing, using the existing avenues that are out there for reporting wrongdoing, including the Criminal Code, the Ombudsman Act, and the Employment Act. So it doesn't duplicate those avenues. It just ties them together and makes it an offense against the municipal acts for a member of council to reprise. And it defines clearly what reprisal means and what a wrongdoing is, and makes those offenses subject to disqualification if a member is found guilty of doing that. They were totally supported by the association, worked out in detail with them in the years between 2015 and 2018 to make sure we had covered sort of all the concerns that were out there about the gaps in the existing employment legislation.
Well, I think it's an important body of work, and I hope that the measures that have been brought about, it seems that it's been developed in a real thorough way, and with the sector and with the administrators as well, and with the associations. So, I wish everyone well on this front, because there is a lot of anecdotal concerns that sort of get shared, and I appreciate all those that were part of sort of raising their hand to say that this needed to be improved in Saskatchewan to ensure protections for workers in this situation. As it relates to the changes around conflict of interest, am I correct that the terms or sort of the treatment around conflict of interest is rather similar to sort of our terms as members of the legislature, or how do they differ, and what were some of the concerns around conflict of interest changes that were brought?
And let me do that. Okay. They are similar. But the amendments clarify what constitutes what is defined as a conflict of interest under the Act, in terms of the current wording references improperly furthering the private interest of a closely connected person, and that's defined as an immediate family member or a business associate. And what the amendments do is change that wording to improperly furthering the interest of any private interest, and the private interest is defined as well under the Act. What we found from 2015 in actual court cases and reports of the Ombudsman was that the municipal acts were out of alignment with the common law expectation of what constitutes a conflict of interest, which is really improperly furthering any private interest and not acting in the interest of the municipality as a whole. And so those reports indicated that the acts may be actually leading to some confusion, where a council member may think it's okay to further the interest of a brother or a cousin, because though that's not defined as a closely connected person, or a friend or a neighbor even. So the intent of these amendments was to make that, to remove that sort of discrepancy or that misalignment between what the common law rules, or what the common law expects of public officials, and what the legislation reads. Supported by the Ombudsman in their latest report, as maybe helping to alleviate some of the confusion that's among councils or council members.
Thanks for that. With respect to changes to ensure there's consistency around firearms treatment within the province, not a patchwork across the province. I guess I'm just looking to the consultation that occurred on that front, and if any concerns with the changes that are being brought today, if there were any concerns noted to the minister or officials.
So I'll just take that one to start with. And I guess that was one of the amendments that came up after we did our broad consultation that I had spoke to you about. So when we looked at, when we left committee and we went and did our work as to what that would look like moving forward, we went to municipal websites to see exactly what kind of bylaws and rules were out there regarding firearms and how they were using that, and we saw that they were using it for public ceremonies and funerals, and if they were opening up a gun range, then they would do noise bylaws and all of that kind of stuff. So we just took the information that we found from all of the different municipal bylaws that were already out there, and saw what they already had, and decided that by doing this through regulations, that it would be easiest for the municipalities, if they needed to change anything moving forward, and it would happen in a timely fashion, they could come to us and request that change, and we could do it at that point in time. And of course, if it's with regards to banning guns and that sort of thing, then it's something that we wouldn't be amenable to. We would probably say no. But if they wanted to open up a gun range and put the bylaws in place and put the noise laws in place, absolutely, then that's something that could happen in a timely fashion. So that's how we got to that.
And as far as the consultation with the municipal associations on this front with the sector, were there any, are there any concerns that have been identified through your consultations by external stakeholders?
No, as I mentioned, this, we actually took care of this as we were doing the amendments after the fact. So by doing it through regulations, now what will happen is it will come into place, and then we will talk to those associations, and through the regulations, if there are any strong concerns, we'll deal with it at that point in time.
So you haven't consulted municipalities?
Not specifically on this amendment, because it was so late in the game. And by putting it in regulation instead of the legislation, then that allows for us to have those conversations and do any amendments if necessary.
Okay. Not ideal to not have the stakeholders. I can't speak for them. I suspect there's a sense that having a patchwork of bylaws across the province on some of these fronts probably isn't desired. I hear a statement that there's some flexibility that can be built in for municipalities, but it, yeah, I guess it's not ideal. I guess when was this initiated? I was hopeful that that at least there had been engagement with the stakeholders for a bill that's before us at this stage of the committee.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing that I would note is the existing bylaws that are placed are actually grandfathered. It's not like we're going to go back and change anything that people are already doing. But I'll maybe let Rod address. I don't recall when we took this to committee the first time, but you probably do.
It was in spring. The word on the potential federal legislation came in spring, so it was after the bill had been introduced. So there was really no opportunity to consult, and we were waiting for, and Justice was waiting for the specific wording of the federal amendment, which still we're not sure about. So that's why the general wording was provided through the amendment, and making sure that it applies only to new bylaws going forward, and limiting that authority, and then also adding, as the minister mentioned, regulation-making authority to deal with any clarification or issues that we may need to once the federal wording becomes clear.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of at first blush, and, and quick presentation certainly seems reasonable in how the approach, how folks are approaching this. But again, it's sure, it's ideal and kind of the way it should be, that before we're before a table like this, that we're able to bring forward the perspectives of the sector partners. But I guess we'll all be engaged moving forward on this front. With respect to some of the changes around the, I guess just the reporting, or for municipalities, or workload changes as a result of the new legislative changes, have you heard how prepared municipalities are to, I know they've gone to a lot of work to sort of prepare for these changes. What's the state of play on that front around workload and preparedness for municipalities with respect to the changes around how they operate and how they keep records and how they manage their business?
Okay, so that's a pretty broad question, and I guess we could go anywhere with that. But I think generally the changes that are taking place, whether they're administratively or whatever the case might be, is all to ensure that reporting is done in a timely fashion and is the most accurate as possible. And I think municipalities share in that with us. They want to see the same thing right across the province. And anytime that any changes are made, if they're cumbersome for a municipality, through our advisory services, we have a lot of great staff that take the time to deal with each of those communities on a one-on-one basis, walk them through what the changes are, and if they need additional assistance, they will help them with that kind of stuff. So our intention isn't to make this cumbersome for them by any stretch of the imagination. It's just, making for a little bit more accountability and a little bit more transparency right across the whole piece. And that's what we found through our consultations, is what everybody's goal was.
No, I appreciate that. I know municipalities out there, want to, they're proud to be good, strong stewards of their communities and their resources. They're often short on resources, and sometimes, I think have a lot of pressure to, with the demands that they face within their workload. And I know I've heard from municipalities across the province at some of these sector stakeholder meetings, that it takes a lot of work to change practice, but the goals and the aims that are put forward here are important. So. Could you just expand a little bit on one of the points that's I guess a change here, and that's that it extends the period of suspension from council for 3 to 12 years for a member held financially liable for an unauthorized transaction?
Sure, I'm probably going to turn this over to Rod for some more explanation on the history behind it. But, when you're voted in as a member of City Council or a member of the Legislative Assembly, you're held to a higher threshold. And when you do things that lose the trust of the voters that have voted you in, I think accordingly so you should be punished. But I will turn that over to Rod for some real background. Sure. That's my opinion.
There's been longstanding provisions in the Act that make it an offense for a council to knowingly vote for an unauthorized expenditure or an unbudgeted expenditure, unless it's an emergency, and there's wording around that. So we're not changing the intent or the policy around those provisions. The punishment was a disqualification, and the period was 3 years, which used to be a long time ago now, used to be the term of office for municipal councillors. So it's a standalone provision that had sort of been forgotten about really when we changed the disqualification period to be 12 years back in 2015 and make that consistent among the 3 acts. At one time, the 3 acts had all different periods of disqualification for various things, and we consolidated all those provisions in one set back in 2015 and made the period consistent at 12 years. But we forgot about that one. And our advisory services made us aware of that. And so we altered it this time to make it clear that it should be consistent. If it's a disqualification matter, then the period should be the same.
Yeah, makes sense. With respect to the changes around the rules for assessment, what's going on there?
No real changes to the rules other than regarding resource production equipment. And it's just clarifying the definition of what is and isn't considered resource production equipment. And this follows a court case in the fall, which actually came after the bill had been prepared. So what we're doing is making sure that we have regulation making authority again to further clarify what is and isn't included in resource production equipment in that definition for assessment purposes. And it's based on our consultations with SAMA.
Thank you very much. And the property tax appeal process, how is it being changed by the act before us?
There's a few things we're doing here. Did you want to? I'll cover some of the, they're not quite housekeeping, but some of the smaller items that we're changing there. We're clarifying that a board of revision should be appointed when the assessment roll is prepared, just so that there's no delay there. The timeline for appeal decisions for all municipalities is set at 180 days. Currently, that's in the Cities Act, but not in the other two. So we're making that consistent. We're doing some things from the appellant's point of view, to make sure that the notices that are prescribed in regs, but they're required under the acts, have the contact information both for the municipality and the Board of Revision, as well as information on the fees, so making that clear. Also, when a person files their notice, they're given some time to perfect it if it's deficient. We're making sure that they are told what is deficient about the notice. The legislation was silent on that, so there have been instances where they were just turned back to say it was deficient, and it was left to the appellant. So we're making sure that the Secretary of the Board of Revision makes that clear. We're also clarifying some wording regarding transcripts and recording of hearings to make sure that that's written, and so we're adding that word in there. Also, there are situations where a property owner may not be a party to an assessment agreement or an appeal, maybe a tenant that does the appeal. So we're making sure that a property owner is notified of those situations. Again, just closing that loop, that the Act was silent on it. In terms of tax payments, no major changes, but we're just clarifying where there are situations of partial tax payments and the apportionment of tax payments so that they go to all the taxing partners. For example, the municipality as well as the library, if they're on the tax roll, the province through education property tax. Just making sure that wording is clear about when someone pays a partial amount, how that's apportioned. And probably the major thing is allowing for some regulation-making authority, again, around some of the definitions and some of the qualifications for Board of Revision members, and then providing for provincially established boards of revision, which Alyssa can speak on in more detail. Give me a break.
Thank you. Alyssa Aiken, Executive Director of Policy and Program Services. So starting last summer, we started engaging stakeholders in a pretty intensive consultation process around the first level of appeals for property tax. We had heard that first level of appeal, so there's a number of levels of appeals in Saskatchewan. The first level is with municipalities and then SMB and then through the courts. That first level of appeal wasn't working as well as we wanted it to, and just in the sense of getting through those appeals in a timely way for taxpayers. So we engaged in a consultation process last summer, as I said, and really brought a number of people together and got a consultant to work through the challenges that people were seeing with that first level. Praxis did that report for us. It's on our website, and it certainly came to a great degree of consensus among stakeholders about what some of the challenges were, and so it gave us a really good path forward in terms of improving that system. So since that time, we've been working on a number of new pillars to that first level of appeals. So maintaining standards, just making sure that those first level of appeal, those board members understand the expectations of them, that they have the training needed to hear appeals in a timely way, to render good solid decisions. Mandatory training, so making sure that, again, that they have access to that training so that they can really have those qualifications needed for this important job. Municipal autonomy, of course, was a principle that came through the consultations really clearly. Some municipalities do want to maintain their own boards of revision, and it's very important to them that they maintain that. City of Regina is a great example of a board that's doing a great job, and certainly they're interested in maintaining that. And so having a choice around that. But then also in the smaller areas, or there's large portions of the province where they don't see many appeals, and so it's challenging to bring together people who have enough of experience to hear those appeals. If you hear one appeal every 4 years, it's pretty challenging to maintain current in that. So the idea of having a provincial board of revision came through that, where could there be a default board at the provincial level where municipalities who don't want to maintain their own board would have somewhere to go. And then the final pillar is the provincial registrar. And so streamlining the process by having a single intake for appeals, and then that single intake could funnel those appeals to the appropriate board, whether that's a municipal one or a provincial one. So right now we're working with stakeholders. We have a steering committee formed and are working through those changes. Our intention is to have this process up and running by 2023, which would be midway through that assessment cycle. So hopefully the slowest time in terms of the appeals for the system. So the legislation enables this system through regulations, but certainly we don't have all the details worked out. We continue to work through that with stakeholders.
Thanks so much. I guess maybe touching on some of the changes around energy efficiency and renewable power, and some of the changes that I believe could aid some improvements on this front and some greater control by municipalities. Could you speak to what's being brought on that front and who is involved in that body of work?
Sure. So the intent with this is, this was a request that came forward by the municipalities to try and get some more work being done within their municipalities, people that wanted to change lines from their house to the water main or whatever the case may be, but they couldn't afford to do it in one tranche. So this is just allowing municipalities the opportunity to be able to put that on the tax roll and spread that out over time. I guess technically they're loaning the money to the ratepayer until they can afford to pay that off, but it goes on their tax bill. So it's another way to help encourage green energy projects that are happening. So, if they did want to do that solar project but couldn't afford the entire thing right away, then they could put that on their tax roll and have the opportunity to pay it over time also. And I will, if Rod wants to expand on that, but I think that's the intent of it.
Sure. Just to expand a little bit on it, it ensures that it's done by agreement with the property owner. So a case-by-case or a program-based decision. It's entirely optional. And the legislation amendments were needed to ensure that the programs of this nature, whether it's environmental improvements or custom work that's done by the municipality on behalf of the owner, if they did do a program of this, it wouldn't be counted against their debt or their debt limit because it is being repaid. So the legislation needed to be amended for that, and to anytime you want to put something on a person's property taxes, you need to do it by legislation. And it was those amendments were brought forward by the City of Regina and City of Saskatoon. Regina is for custom work and Saskatoon for the environmental improvements. But we decided they were pretty good provisions to put in the other two acts. Again, entirely optional for municipalities to choose to use.
So you use the example of, it might be like a service line, like a water line, might be an example of a project like that. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then you use the example of a solar project. Could you expand a little bit about, what that would look like? We're talking about like an individual homeowner, like a rooftop solar type array.
Well, it would be something that would be an agreement between the homeowner and the municipality. So if a homeowner did decide to do that description that you just gave on their rooftop, then absolutely that would be something that would fall under these parameters.
No, it offers, it sounds like it offers good flexibility. It also sounds a little bit similar to some of the push that we've been making just a bit around being able to enable some of those energy efficiency retrofits and solar arrays as well provincially. And there's a pretty great relationship that exists with our Crown Corporation, SaskPower, on that front that really could allow folks to take on some projects and then have that amortized, of course, and paid back through a period of time. I'll leave that. It's not our time with the Minister of SaskPower here tonight, because the one thing for municipalities is they're still rather limited when it comes to debt. They've got their a lot of demands when it comes to the operations and a lot of capital demands as well, and they can't run a deficit, of course. So to further enable some of what we're talking about here, there might be it might be interesting to expand that conversation with the Minister of SaskPower. I don't know that I have much. It's been a long day, hasn't it, for everybody? I don't think I have any other questions here tonight. I may have questions moving forward on some of these fronts, but thank you very much for your time, and to your officials, thank you very much, and to all the sector partners across the province, all the municipalities across Saskatchewan that are impacted by this work, many of whom will have been directly involved in the creation of this work. Just thank you to them for the good work that they do. And it's with COVID-19, these really are extraordinary times, and there's a lot of pressure that municipalities are facing that are different than what they've faced in the past. So just sending care to everybody.
Are there any more questions or comments from any committee members? Seeing none. Clause 1, short titled. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2.1, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2.2. I recognize Mr. Dutremont.
I would like to propose an amendment, amend clause 2-2 of the printed bill A by renumbering subsection 1 as section 2-2 and B by striking out subsection 2. I so move.
Do committee members agree with the amendment as read?
Agreed.
Carried. Is clause 2.2 as amended agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2.3. I recognize Mr. Dutremont.
Thank you. I move an amendment that clause 2-3 of the printed bill A be renumbering subsection 1 as subsection 2, B by renumbering subsection 2 as subsection 3, and C by adding the following subsection before subsection 2. 1. The following subsection is added after subsection 8.1. 1.1, notwithstanding any other provision of this act or any other act or law, a city has no power to pass any new bylaws respecting firearms unless otherwise provided for by regulation. I so move.
Mr. Dutremont has moved an amendment to clause 2.3. Do committee members agree with the amendment as read?
Agreed.
Carried. Is clause 2.3 amended agreed? As amended agreed? Carried. Clause 2.4, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2.5, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2.6, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2.7, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2.8, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2.9, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2.10, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 211, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 212, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 213, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 214, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 215, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 216, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 217, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 218, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 219, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 220, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 221, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 222, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 223, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 224, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 225, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 226, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 227, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 228, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 229, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 230, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 231, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 232, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 233, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 234, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 235, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 236, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 237, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 238, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 239, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 240, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 241, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 242, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 243, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 244, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 245, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 246, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 247, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 248, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 249, is that agreed? Clause 2, carried. Clause 250, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 251, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 252, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 253, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 254, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 255, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 256, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 257, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 258, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 259, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 260, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 261, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 262, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 263, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 264, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 265, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 266, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 267, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 268, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 269, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 270, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 271, is that agreed? Clause 272, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 273, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 274, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 275, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 276, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 277, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 278, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 279, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 280, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 281, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 282, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 283, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 3.1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 3.2, I recognize Mr. Dutremont.
I would like to move an amendment, amend Clause 3-2 of the printed bill, A, by striking out Clause E, by B, by relettering Clause F as Clause E, C, by relettering Clause G as Clause F, D, by relettering Clause H as Clause G, and by relettering Clause I as Clause H. I so move.
Do the committee members agree with the amendment as read? Carried. Is Clause 3.3 amended, Clause 3.2, I skipped ahead. Is Clause 3.2 amended as agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.3, I recognize Mr. Dutremont.
I have an amendment for this also. Amend Clause 3-3 of the printed bill, A, by renumbering subsection 1 as subsection 2, B, by renumbering subsection 2 as subsection 3, and C, by adding the following subsection before subsection 2. 1, the following subsection is added after subsection 8.1. 1.1, notwithstanding any other provision of this act or any other act or law, a municipality has no power to pass any new bylaws respecting firearms unless otherwise provided for by regulation. I so move.
Mr. Dutremont has moved an amendment to Clause 3.3. Do committee members agree with the amendment as read? Agreed. Carried. Is Clause 3.3 as amended agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.4, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.5, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.6, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.7, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.8, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.9, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.10, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.11, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.12, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.13, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.14, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.15, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.16, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.17, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.18, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.19, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.20, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.21, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.22, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.23, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.24, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.25, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.26, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.27, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.28, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.29, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.30, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.31, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.32, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.33, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.34, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.35, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3.36, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 3.37, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 3.38, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 3.39, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 3.40, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 3.41, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 342, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 343, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 334, is that agreed?
Agreed.
344, isn't that one? I thought I said 344. 344, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 345, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 346, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 347, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 348, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 349, is that agreed? Carried. Halfway through. Clause 350, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 351, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 352, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 353, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 354, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 355, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 356, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 357, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 358, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 359, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 360, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 361, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 362, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 363, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 364, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 365, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 366, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 367, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 368, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 369, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 370, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 371, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 372, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 373, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 374, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 375, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 376, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 377, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 378, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 379, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 380, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 381, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 382, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 383, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 384, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 385, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 386, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 387, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 388, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 389, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 390, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.2, I recognize Mr. Dutremont.
Thank you. I'd like to move an amendment, Clause 4-2 of the printed bill, A, by striking out Clause E, B, by relettering Clause F as Clause E, C, by relettering Clause G as Clause F, D, by relettering Clause H as Clause G, and E, by relettering Clause I as Clause H. I so move.
Mr. Dutremont has moved an amendment to Clause 4.2. Do committee members agree with the amendment as read?
Agreed.
Carried. Is Clause 4.2 as amended agreed?
Agreed.
Clause 4.3, I recognize Mr. Dutremont.
I move an amendment to Clause 4-3 of the printed bill, A, by renumbering subsection 1 as subsection 2, B, by renumbering subsection 2 as subsection 3, and C, by adding the following subsection before subsection 2. 1. The following subsection is added after subsection 8.1. 1.1. Notwithstanding any other provision of this act or any other act or law, a municipality has no power to pass any new bylaws respecting firearms unless otherwise provided for by regulation. I so move.
Mr. Dutremont has moved an amendment to Clause 4.3. Do committee members agree with the amendment as read?
Agreed.
Carried. Is Clause 4.3 as amended agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 4.4, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Ah, there we are. Carried. I had to find it first. Clause 4.5, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 4.6, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.7, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.8, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.9, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.10, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.11, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.12, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.13, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.14, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.15, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.16, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.17, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.18, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.19, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.20, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.21, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.22, carried. Clause 4.22, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.23, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.24, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.25, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.26, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.27, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.28, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.29, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.30, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.31, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.32, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.33, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.34, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.35, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.36, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.37, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.38, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.39, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.40, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.41, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.42, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.33, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.44, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.45, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.46, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.47, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.48, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.49, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.50, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.51, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.52, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.53, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.54, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.55, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.56, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.57, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.58, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.59, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.60, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.61, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.62, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.63, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.64, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.65, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.66, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.67, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.68, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.69, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.70, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.71, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.72, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4.73, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 474, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 475, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 476, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 477, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 478, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 479, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 480, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 481, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 482, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 483, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 484, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 485, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 486, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5.1, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5.2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5.3, I recognize Mr. Dutremont.
I would move an amendment to Clause 5-3 of the printed bill, amend Clause 5-3 of the printed bill in subsection 2 by striking out 4-42 and 4-44 and substituting 4-42, 4-44 and 4-81. I so move.
Do committee members agree, or Mr. Dutremont has moved an amendment to Clause 5.3. Do committee members agree with the amendment as read?
Agreed.
Carried. Is Clause 5.3 amended as agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. I recognize Mr. Dutremont.
I have one further amendment to propose by moving an amendment to the long title of the printed bill, striking out the long title of the printed bill and substituting the following: an act to amend the Cities Act, the Municipalities Act and the Northern Municipalities Act, 2010, and to make consequential amendments to other acts. I so move.
Mr. Dutremont has moved an amendment to the long title. Do committee members agree with the amendment as read?
Agreed.
Carried. Is the amendment to the long title agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Chair, been a long night. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts as follows: the Miscellaneous Municipal Statutes Amendment Act 2019. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. I would ask a member to move that we report Bill number 194, the Miscellaneous Municipal Statutes Amendment Act 2019 with amendment. Mr. Francis moves. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. This concludes our business for this evening. Minister, do you have any closing comments?
Well, just briefly, since that was a little drawn out there, we only open up the act every 10 years, so it was essential. I just want to thank my officials for coming out tonight. I truly appreciate the time that they spend on the work that is done and the help that they're always giving me. And thank you to the members of the committee for being here tonight. I appreciated that. And of course, all of the support staff that make these evenings happen. So thank you very much.
Mr. Witherspoon, do you have any closing comments?
Just about an hour of remarks I'd like
Oh,
to
okay. Sure.
Thank you so very much, Chair and Minister and officials, as I think I've identified already or thanked you already. Thank you for the work and all those municipal partners. No great thanks to the member for Cannington for extending the meeting unduly here this evening on this long day. But jokes aside, thanks to everyone for the work.
I also want to extend my thanks to the minister and the members being here tonight and all the support staff. It's been a day. Seeing that we have no further business this evening, I will ask a member to move a motion of adjournment. Mr. Dutremont has moved a motion to adjourn. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. The committee stands adjourned till Wednesday, June 17th at 3:30 PM.